they weren't. You get close.
Hey, you've tuned in to Cisco Unplugged.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cisco Unplugged. I'm Dan Clamert, leader of the Wireless Center of Excellence here at Cisco. And this week in episode 17, we're going to be discussing a different topic than we originally had listed. But due to a schedule change, today's topic, we will be covering auto AP location and client-side find time measurement. So with that, I would like to welcome back to the show Ian Procyk from Vancouver, Canada, and Darshan Patel from Raleigh, North Carolina. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good, Dan. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. First, before we get started, I've got a couple of housekeeping reminders here. If you have any questions, we use Slido. And if you've joined us via the WebEx window, you will see the Slido window available on the right-hand side of your WebEx window. If you're tuning in via YouTube, there's a link down below. You can click on that and join the Slido with the passcode and submit any questions. We have people standing by to address those questions. We may take some of those live as well here on the show during today's broadcast. As usual, this session is recorded and it will be available later on our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/@getunplugged. When you go out there, there's lots of great content. Be sure to click subscribe so that way you're notified when we do go live with future content and post future episodes there. All right, with that, let's get to the show. So Ian, take it away.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks again, Dan, and thanks for having us on. And like Dan said, this is a new topic, so new to me, new to a lot of folks, and looking forward to some good questions today, so keep that coming here. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge my old friends and colleagues at the University of British Columbia, namely Jeff, Matt, Graham, who were helping me run a bunch of testing on this feature, this function, late in the summer, into the early part of the school year. Couldn't have done it without you guys. Thanks so much. And these pictures you see here are some pictures from our testing on campus, some of the buildings. It's an absolute beautiful place. And as I may have mentioned earlier there, I spent a number of years as my first job at UBC doing wireless network administration. And so this feature kind of is near and dear to my heart because I guess it gets to what we're trying to solve. And I'll talk to that in a second. Darshan's on the line. He's going to keep me honest and ask questions. I've been kind of knee deep in this for a little while. And so, you know, the first time you hear about this, there's lots of things that are kind of net new and a different way of thinking. So I think it's important for us to kind of take a step back at times and look at the bigger picture. So you might have seen in our release notes in 1712, this right at the top, a mention about AP auto location and geolocation and whatnot. Find time measurement is also called out in here. And this is really what we're talking about today. And, you know, to kind of really get to the point of this, what problem are we trying to solve here, right? What is the thing that we're trying to do that causes a great deal of consternation? And I guess go back to my original point about starting my career at UBC. One of the very first things that I was tasked with was, getting the network drive to basically 1,000 levels, 1,000 floors, and having to go through and position one by one, every AP on all the maps as we are getting into that back in the beginnings of Wi-Fi. And things really haven't changed too much in the last 15, 20 years. There's been some tools available to help with the automatic import and CAD imports and whatnot, some third-party tools. But for the most part, it's drag and drop, putting APs onto a floor. And you have to know where those access points are. Sometimes that's walking the floors and marking up a drawing. That's quite often how it's done. A lot of times it's literally getting paperwork back from installation crew that provides you sketches, and you're transposing that into Prime or DNAT, Catalyst Center, or if you're in the dashboard. This is how things are done, right? And so this is the problem we're trying to solve, is we're trying to make that easier for people, and namely in the new construction renovation space where you're dealing with net new maps, right? If you've got existing maps that are accurate, this particular part of the presentation, the upfront part around AP auto location, probably won't save you a ton of time. It's not intended for that. It's net new installations. So with that, I wanted to just kind of lay the foundation here with a little video. I'm going to talk over top of this because I've muted the audio in the background. The fellow you see on the bottom left-hand side of the screen is Dave Banham. And maybe Tom will get that pulled up full screen if you can. The video here is actually showing you what this looks like. And I'm going to pause it occasionally. First of all, you'll see here we're using Cisco Spaces for this. Now, Cisco Spaces is the user interface for this particular function as it stands today. And the reason for that is that that team, the Spaces team, had some bandwidth to do the engineering for this to start. And it's fully acknowledged that obviously we have maps in multiple different locations, and we want to get to one source of truth within the network for mapping data. But rather than not doing something, we did something. So we started here, and you'll see this trickle down into across the portfolio as we move forward. But we started in Cisco Spaces, and the prerequisite that you see here is loading in a CAD drawing. Now, you see an output of that CAD drawing here, a rendered output that actually includes furniture. And we're doing that as part of the whole Rich Maps program, which has been around for a while now. And you might have seen that it's part of the whole Smart Workspaces initiative. So once you have the map rendered, the next step is to go ahead and add the access points to the floor. Now, this is kind of cool. This is where things start to take a bit of a divergence from what we've done in the past. So what you see here is Dave highlighting the number of access points that are perceived to be on that floor. And what we're doing is we're actually using air pressure information, we're using CDP information, and over-the-air NDP information to determine what APs are legitimately on the floor. And so on the right-hand side, you see that. We can actually select, as you can see here, the subset of APs that are just on that floor by clicking on that button, and the list shrinks on the right-hand side. Now, the cool part about this is when you hit the next button, what's actually happening in Spaces is that we're running an algorithm that is leveraging some collection of time of flight data. And I'll get into that in a bit here. It's ranging between all the access points to automatically position them on the floor. Now, it's important to note that the prerequisite for this is that you have known locations for 3 or 4 APs, generally around the perimeter of your building. The rest of them will fall into place. And you can see here on this particular example, there's just that one AP at the top of the screen that is just a little bit outside. It's actually on the balcony, and you'll see Dave go in here and manually drag that back in. So we do allow for correction on this and the ability to make minute adjustments. Now, it's important to note here that you can specify the anchor locations, those 3 or 4 known APs. Obviously, the more the better, but we're trying to make this automated. You can specify those manually, right? So you can actually say, this is where this guy is, if you walk the floor and you know that's next to that beam or that pillar. But you can also leverage GPS. And you'll start to see us. We actually have a GPS module that can be retrofitted or purchased with our CW series access points, and goes back to like the 9130 as well. That GPS module actually allows us to have the precise location of the AP, so long as it has visibility to the sky. So if you have a few APs on a floor that have the GPS module, that's an option. It's not a requirement, though. You can still manually position to start this algorithm. So
is there a requirement, Ian, how many APs on a floor that requires GPS module?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Darshan. There isn't a fixed requirement, but you can think of it like the old school location guidance. Obviously, we want to be around the perimeter because that bounds the calculation. And, if you think about a typical building, 4 sides, probably want to start with 4 APs. If you've got something that is very unique and specific in your environment, like an atrium or some sort of multi-level thing, you may want to put a couple APs around that spot to help. This is all brand new, so I think we're still learning a little bit about this, and that's part of the reason why I'm walking people through this today, to show you what we found on campus when we were testing this.
Oh, cool, great.
So the next question that comes often here is like, where did this all come from? Like, how did we get here? What's the background? And so the good news here is that this is all built around standards, and the standards have been in place for a number of years. But the infrastructure and clock stability, if you will, on access points is needed to catch up. And we're doing time of flight measurement here. So the 2 working groups, if you're so curious, 802.11MC, that working group led to the revision in the 2016 amendment for 802.11. and that defined the initial specification for fine time measurement, so the time of flight of a packet in the air. And following up on that, more recently here is 802.11az, and that working group is really pushing the boundaries on this, moving it into the higher frequency bands down the road. Also thinking about ways to improve security in fine time measurement, right? Encryption to avoid things like man-in-the-middle attacks, that kind of stuff. So we've been around for a while, and we've had some generations of support for this in clients. I would say, namely, Google's been driving this agenda quite heavily on their side of the house, and Android. Other vendors do support 11MC. I believe Apple is supporting this as well. In the iPhone, I think the level of API access is still, at least the last time I read this, is still being worked. So 802.11az is the up and coming spec here, and you can see the call out that we're typically dealing. If you have this environment set up with your APs, you're typically dealing with accuracies kind of down in the 1 meter range, and that certainly correlates with what I'm seeing, and oftentimes better than that. And as you move into wider channels, and then there's a whole bunch of reasons behind that, but wider channel bandwidth provides more accuracy. So when we start thinking about 80 meg wide channels in 6E, we can start to get that accuracy even below a meter in some cases. Now, we don't have the time today to go into a full deep dive in how fine time measurement is actually working under the covers. But the good news here is that Jerome Henry, who many of you probably know, Jerome's an absolute fantastic instructor, one of our colleagues in Cisco, and Jerome did an excellent presentation a little while back to the CWNP TV channel. So you can take a look there, links on the bottom. You can just search that up. Excellent video, highly recommended. So with that, I wanted to kind of roll into some of the testing that we did, because we saw the little presentation from Dave as far as how this is going to work, and I said, okay, that's cool. Let's put this into practice and see what this looks like across 2 different buildings. And so what we did is we looked at 2 different sites. On the left-hand side, you see a building that is 1920s vintage construction. This is a wood frame building, so RF propagates fairly well. And on the right-hand side, you see a post-war building that is actually used by the IT department on campus. And that building is known as the LS Klink building, concrete, reinforced concrete building, quite typical of what we'd see of that era. Now, these 2 buildings, we wanted to understand exactly where the existing AP locations were. So here's my colleague, Matt. Matt and I worked together with my laser measurement tool to go through the floor, a couple of floors we were testing on, and actually measure everything precisely. And we did that because although we know where the APs were and they were on existing maps, we wanted to be extremely accurate in their position so that we could compare how fine time measurement did its calculation and what it came up with as the outcome. So you can just see here, a little zoom in. We were actually measuring the distance to 2 walls, right? So every AP, we'd measure the distance to other known objects that we could then mark up on a CAD drawing. So once we did that, we moved into the spaces setup, right? So we actually have to go in and, as Dave was showing, go in and actually do the provisioning on the back end to make this work and start the process of measurement and ranging between access points. And so you actually see the import process here. These are the 2 buildings we were testing in, the Klink building and the geography building. Those buildings, we got access to CAD drawings, imported them. We didn't do any of the furniture layouts. That all was on the drawing by itself, and it gets you this kind of neat kind of 3D rendering here. And once that's done, the next step in the process is to start ranging. Now, what this does is actually kick off the measurements between APs. So today, we're doing that measurement kind of one shot. So you hit the button, and it will go and put all the APs onto the same channel so they can all hear each other. It sets the channel width to be the optimum bandwidth, typically an 80 meg wide channel. We're really ranging on 5 gigahertz primarily and 6 gigs because of the bandwidth over 2.4. Again, keep in mind, bandwidth has a direct correlation to resolution of location accuracy. So it does all that on your behalf. Now, it does that, and it also lets you know that when you do this ranging, at least initially, you're going to have a potential disruption to client connectivity. And keep in mind that what we're doing is we're putting all the APs on the same channel. So this is going to look like a roam to a wireless client, right? My channel is suddenly going to change. It's going to go to a wider channel, perhaps than what I was on. The SSIDs still are in operation, but there's going to be some churn in the network while this happens. Now, the good news is that you can contain this to a floor, or a building, you don't have to do this across your entire environment all in one shot. And you could do it opportunistically. You can do this. In my case, we were doing a lot of this testing, midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, so we weren't affecting any users. That's how things are done right now. Obviously, we may look at some enhancements to this down the road, but the initial ranging, of course, it needs to be determined. How far are access points from each other? So once you get that going, you're given the option, as I kind of explaining here, to do this now or put it on a schedule. And then you're given a 15-second countdown saying, hey, I'm going to start ranging here, and away we go. So that's the process to start the thing. Now, obviously, network engineer, you have a curiosity as to what's actually going on under the covers. That's pretty important because, what are we actually dealing with here? What is it doing to my network? So I took the opportunity to grab some output here from the WLC.
And Ian, before going there, just a question that came to my mind is, I know AP to AP ranging is great. It gets to a higher resolution with more bandwidth and more channel width. So how about, does it go back to its normal configuration, moving back to either 20 megahertz or 40 megahertz? And how much time does it take in order for network to start providing users to connect it back?
Totally solid questions, actually, and thank you for prompting me because I kind of overlooked that. I guess the first part of your question is does it go back to where it came from? And the answer to that is absolutely. So what we actually do during the ranging initiation is we pause RRM in that area, right? So we are holding the RRM from actually running and changing channels because we're taking measurements. We don't want anything to affect that. Once the ranging is done, in my experience, this can take, for 50, 60 APs on a floor, could take a few minutes, typically 5-6 minutes. I think we cap it at 10. And then things revert back to the channels they were on. So I think that provides some I guess level of assurance here is that you're not destroying your channel plan by doing this.
So we can definitely plan out to implement this new feature for entire campus, and we should be able to knock it out like a couple of buildings in a night, and within a week we can accomplish if we want to implement it right away.
Yeah, and as I was mentioning earlier, I think the big thing here is new construction, new buildings or renovations. And if you've got existing floor plans that are accurate, you don't necessarily need to refine your AP location. But this is going to be super helpful in those. A lot of us that have done this over the years realize that it's garbage in, garbage out. If you're doing things like location services in wireless, you obviously need to have very accurate maps of where your APs are. And if an installer gave you a drawing that's incorrect, human error creeps in, right? You put the label on the AP and that AP, ended up across the floor in a different spot than where it should have been. You wouldn't know that until it's too late. And the idea with things like arranging like this is to actually have electronics take over and provide you some insight into something that may be off course.
And one last question. I know it is a small question, but when you measured each AP location from both walls, that part is just to go ahead and make sure it is at the right location, it shows up, and not necessary for every customer to go through every building.
Yeah, absolutely good point on that. That was us just saying, okay, trust but verify. We want to know exactly where our stuff is for the first time we're testing this, right? And then we want to see what the algorithm produces. So that's the reason why we did the laser measurement to begin with. Just to kind of home in on that, you need to know where at least some of your APs are if you're not using GPS on the AP. So you have to go through some sort of process to determine where those are. And if you use APs near pillars or columns that are on a drawing, that's obviously a fixed object and that's not going to move. So you'd probably want to start with those guys.
So please take us to provide us more information on CLI. What did you find?
For sure. So as you can see on the screen here, first and foremost, what happens is the WLC gets the ranging request. So Spaces is talking down to the connector. The connector is therefore talking to the WLC, and the WLC is saying, hey, I've got a request to do ranging. It looks at the site tag, it looks at the number of APs, and says, here, we're going to start ranging within these APs. Now, on the access point, this is a CLI output from one of the APs under test. You can see some of the output here that says we're starting ranging. You can see that we're moving channels. We're increasing our channel width to 80 megahertz. And then a little bit later on, as the ranging wraps up, you can see the command that, or the output that's printed saying we've completed ranging for 18 of the 20 piers. In this particular case, some of them had fairly low RSSI. They're very distant from us, so they fell into some retransmissions. That's okay. And then the AP sends a ranging report up to the WLC, right? So now I've done my ranging. Access point has completed that. And this is what that output looks like right on the AP. And I've obfuscated some of the MAC addresses here, so you see a black band in there for privacy reasons. But this is one AP's perspective to its neighbors. And the distance is measured in centimeters. And so you can see here we have some close neighbors and we have some ones that are a little further away. And you can also kind of tell that by just looking at the RSSI. Now, the very first time we did this, we tested in like the basement of the building where there is, very high levels of attenuation between access points, and we wanted to see what happened there. And we subsequently tested in other areas and found better results and a little better RSSI as well. Generally speaking, you want to have, neg 75 or there or better for some of the neighbors you're ranging with. Now, upstream on the control. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'll let you continue. And I've got a question. I don't want to change the subject here.
Okay, Dan. Yeah, no worries. We'll just end with a couple points on the CLI and then how this actually showed up, what the result was.
Yep.
So on the WLC, we get the ranging report. So this is now all the APs, kind of a full mesh, how all the APs heard all the other APs they were ranging with. And you can actually see, I'm just showing you two APs here on the far left. I've divided that line horizontally. The top half of the screen is one AP, the bottom is another. You can see all the distances. So this is the data that's now being collected, aggregated at the controller, and fed upstream to spaces. Now, this is an output that we had looked at as a comparison here, and to see what was the ground truth versus what spaces computed using auto ranging. And the colors, I'll explain. The red dots you see on the screen are the measured locations with laser. So those are all APs we measured precisely with laser. And again, this was the first time we did this. We didn't do any enhancements. We just wanted to see how this played with an existing environment. The purple dots were APs that we used as anchor locations. So we knew their locations and we drug the AP there. And so you can see in some of the cases here, FTM was bang on accurate. Like we were sub 1 meter. There's a couple of cases here in like that one room 40 at the bottom. It was a little bit off. But that was early testing. We subsequently tested on a different channel plan. We made some changes to the algorithm with engineering. This was done during early field trial code. And this has actually tightened up even quite a bit. But that was just an idea, right? An old building with a non-optimized AP layout to see how coverage works. You can see we have a lot of hallway APs in here as well. So, not necessarily the most ideal location deployment, but hey, this is what we got. Pretty cool. Dan, you had a question?
Interesting. I just want to make sure that interns are going to have fun time learning something new this time instead of going to each building.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I had a question now, Ian. So what about AP height? How does that factor into this? And then if you are using the GPS modules, how does this work with the maps? Do the maps have GPS coordinates and does Spaces accommodate? How does Spaces accommodate that?
Absolutely. So if you're using GPS on an AP, so you're retrofitting the GPS module. It's a USB receiver that we now have. I think it's like CW-accessory GPS1 is a part number. If you put that on an AP, obviously you don't necessarily need to measure its location manually. You rely on that GPS. Yep. Now, the 1712 controller code, which is kind of my next point here. The 1712 controller code is the prerequisite. So it's the WLC version that starts to introduce the geolocation and mapping information. So you'll actually see OpenStreetMaps in the WLC GUI, so you can actually see where the APs are located. You can see how many satellites they're seeing, etc. And we sample that GPS coordinates over a period of time so that as things drift and you see more satellites, you can have a more precise location. So I would suggest that you put the GPS modules in, and then maybe 24 hours later, half a day later, you come back and look at doing the ranging. At least how things are set up today. Did that answer your question, Dan?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Ian,
Cool.
Appreciate it.
So as I mentioned here,
No,
yeah, go ahead, Darshan.
no, one question is trying to understand. So every floor, if a building is made up of 4 floors, it will be ideal to have four, for example, 4 APs in each corner of each floor have that GPS module to get that accurate location.
Yeah, correct. And I think you could understand that as things like AFC, automatic frequency coordination, which we've talked about prior on our channel here, as things like this become a reality, I think you could start to understand the need for GPS as a base functionality on future access points. And I think you're going to start to see that from the industry. We've been doing GPS on outdoor APs for years. And I think you're going to start to see more things like that down the line. For now, obviously, we have a lot of existing APs that have no GPS. So in that case, you would put the module on to get those coordinates. And if you wanted to, right? Again, you can still do this manually by measuring those initial locations and figuring out the rest. So.
And we are just using GPS module to get that GPS location for an AP from the privacy point of view and nothing apart from that.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, this is the AP trying to figure out where it is in the world, and height and whatnot is going to play a factor at some point in the AFC side of things as well. To Dan's earlier question, it doesn't at least at this point we assume everything's on the same level when we're doing this testing. So now, again, we don't have a ton of time to go into the specifics here, but there's a config guide available now on Cisco.com. This is the Spaces config guide for AP auto location. Highly recommend you take an opportunity to pull that down, go through it. This is just kind of explaining all the stuff that I did, but a little slower, perhaps a little bit more detail, and be useful to review. So this is the AP auto location. And I know we're tight on time here, but I wanted to kind of get that out of the way because it's the foundation for the next cool thing that kind of follows on. And that is the ability to have our access points actually broadcasting their lat and long. And that can be used by client devices to determine their location from a client-side perspective. And that's a cool thing. And I would suggest an interesting new use case for high-precision location. So what I mean by that is, and I'm in my testing, I was using a Google Pixel here, my personal phone. Once you have the AP auto location done, all the APs in your environment inherit lat and long information, right? So the algorithm obviously has the knowledge of those first anchor APs, either manually or via GPS, and the rest of them are inherited based on their actual computed location. So now every AP in your environment is geocoded, which is cool. And that means that the APs broadcast their lat and long. And you can use an app like this. This is Wi-Fi round-trip time scanning app. This is on the Google Play Store. And you can pull this down. You can actually see on the left-hand side here, me measuring the distance to an AP in meters. And this, I think it was 11.37 meters here. So that's cool. That's how you just make sure this is working. Like, are your APs actually beaconing this out? You can do the ranging. You hit the button on the phone, and it starts to ping with the surrounding APs to find out who the nearest one is, and it gives you a list of the distances to all the infrastructure. The follow-on test app, and this is a development and test application for integrators, for engineers, for folks who are getting familiar with this technology, is kind of the cool foreshadowing, I think, of what you're going to see moving forward, and that is the ability to take this data and put it against a known map, right? So right now what I'm doing is I'm using that Wi-Fi RTT locator app, the second app, to load in a floor image, which is just the same image I used in DNAC or in Spaces, my 2D floor plan. And I also load in a CSV file. This is, again, keep in mind, this is an engineering test application here. So I load in a CSV file that contains a list of all the MAC addresses, the BSSIDs that my phone could expect to hear in that building. And what that does is it gives the phone a boundary of APs to scan around. So when you boot up that application, you're given the ability to run a test. And you actually see here on the left-hand side, my device in the middle, ranging with several access points in green around it, and those little blue bars are that. I have a little test video here I wanted to play with you guys and show you what this looks like. So this is me walking into a classroom. This is that same building we were showing earlier here. Now, I pan up and I show you an access point that has a GPS receiver in it. And this actually is a retrofitted 9166 with a GPS module on the side there, as you can see. And that GPS module is one of our anchor APs in this particular case. right? And across the room, above that projector that you see there, is one of the other access points. And there are just 2 APs in this classroom, right? It's a big classroom. And what I'm doing here is, this is the very first time I tested this. I said to the guys down in the basement, I said, I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to see how this works. So literally my first few minutes of testing this ever, dropped my phone down on this podium at the front of the room, and I'm just kind of showing you the characteristics of the room. You'll notice a little diagonal part of the floor here that I'm highlighting with my finger. And you'll see that on the map, that little diagonal cutout up at the top of the room. You can see my phone right on the corner of the podium. Like we're under a meter in accuracy in that particular example there. And you can see the ranging, the FTM ranging peers my phone is peering with. So it's ranging against the other APs in the environment. And I move my phone across the room to another spot. I put it on the table over here. And I just want to see, okay, how many tables am I from the back? I'm 5 tables from the back of the room. And I zoom in on the phone, and you'll actually see here in a second the actual computed location of that. Again, I'm bang on in the center of that table. And in a space, this is never designed for location. Like you couldn't get this level of accuracy in RSSI based location. Pretty impressive. So I have like 10 minutes of this where I'm walking around the space, checking things out in different areas. I'll save you the grueling details of all this, but not needless to say, every time I put my phone down, I was testing this in different rooms. It was probably within 2 to 3 feet of where I was in this particular environment. And then again, in an environment where we never did any precision location. Here's just some higher resolution screenshots showing you some examples of that ranging in a picture format here. Right? So there was the back of that classroom. Here was up near the podium, the front of the room, etc. So that
is very interesting. Just thinking about loud being a healthcare customer and putting in myself into their shoes, trying to see that if I'm a healthcare customer, trying to get that accurate location is very important for me to go ahead and get a lot of things for RTLS, like Stanley Healthcare. Or if I'm a new student and I want to go from one place to another place in a university or higher ed, this is very promising.
Absolutely. And you have to keep in mind that we're talking about location through a slightly different lens here. This is client-derived location. So the client is sensing its surroundings and determining it's performing the calculation. So the added benefit of this is that there's some privacy there. So in this particular application, the upstream infrastructure has no idea that this is going on. It's not privy to the end calculation. And so there's definitely use cases for this. Right now, obviously, I'm showing you an Android phone in that particular form factor. I think there's going to be a market down the road for embedded devices that can support ranging like this, battery-powered, higher precision tags. This is not BLE. This is not, Aero Scout RTLS, where we're using Wi-Fi as we've done in the past. That is a Wi-Fi transmission. This is literally just using the time of flight. And the big difference there is that we're not dealing with the challenges of RSSI and attenuation that come in between us and the object we're trying to measure a distance away from, right? If I've got walls or obstacles, those all influence the perceived distance in an RSSI-based location. Whereas time of flight, obviously speed of light's a constant. The only real thing that I saw in my testing here is in some cases, the raw measurements fluctuate quite a bit, and because we're getting multipath, we're getting bounce between different things in the environment. But the algorithm on the phone, as you saw there, it's about 1 to 2 seconds behind me, and it's doing a lot of smoothing to make sure that the anomalies in the ranging data, are shrunken down and averaged out. It's pretty impressive, I would say, for a first kick at this from a client side. I can see the future here as far as indoor navigation integration. I'm sure Google's got plans to integrate this into mapping and whatnot down the road. And it would make nothing but sense.
But as far as the asset locations are concerned, that will be still based on those tags that requires. This is more about the real world phone-based that provides the privacy for a user to use it and not dependent on the network side.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you're trying to do asset tracking or I would say network-based location where the network is doing the sensing, I think there's, tons of solutions out there. BLE, we've covered this in previous episodes. RTLS has been around for a long, long time. That makes tons of sense. if you were to try and leverage like ranging data like this, you'd have to have a back channel. You'd have to have an association of the access point to do the calculation on the device and then report that upstream to another system, right? Here's where I think I am, versus the network doing the actual computation.
That is very interesting.
So with that, Dan, I think we're probably even over time, but it was a quick review of AP auto location.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Darshan. Appreciate it. Great info, great topic. Love the demos. Appreciate the time and overview. Thanks. So looks like we're good on questions otherwise. So I would like to thank everyone for your time, for tuning in, and also some good comments there in the not in the Slido, not necessarily questions, but we have a fan of our intro, our hold music, and that was kind of entertaining. So thank you for that comment. But if when you do close out, I would just like to ask you to, if you take a second to complete the survey. We do look at those and get the feedback on the show. And also, I would again remind you, this is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@getunplugged. Go out there, subscribe. You'll be able to see this show and much more great content out there from previous episodes and other bonus content out there. And then also, if you have any questions, you'd like to get a hold of us, you can reach out to your local Cisco account team to get a hold of us, or you can email us directly at getunplugged@cisco.com. Feel free to reach out with any questions, ideas for the show, just to say hi. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you. So with that, that's a wrap on another great episode. And until next time, stay connected and unplugged.